what are some of the tips that you could give for any ICPM who is also looking for leadership role in near-term future?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would sum it up with like three words: empowerment, recognition, and resilience. To me, those are like the foundational skills to like building high performing teams.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, Everything Product. So we talk about the latest technology with a product mindset. We are super excited to have Pat Bergstresser today on our podcast. Thanks a lot for taking your time and joining us, Pat. So Pat is a product leader, veteran, and a Twitter influencer. So I'll let Pat introduce himself. So can you introduce yourself to our viewers, Pat?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. As introduced, I'm Pat. I'm currently a product manager at Capital One. I work on the CreditWise app, which is our free score tracking app. It's very similar to Credit Karma or Credit Sesame. It's a free app offered by Capital One, so check it out on the App Store if you'd like. I'm the product manager for our marketplace, which is our monetization team. We put offers on the app to customers that we think are we have an offer that's a good fit for them. Prior to this role, I was a product manager in credit card fraud. So working on synthetic identity fraud in our card fraud division. And then prior to that, I was in the Navy. I was a civil engineer corps officer in the Navy. Took a very strange detour out of construction and civil engineering into tech. But excited to be here today and talk to you guys about product.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the intro, Pat. Yeah, thank you for your service, and we're proud to have you on our podcast here. So, you know, after service, right? You have a lot of options of getting into multiple different disciplines and roles and all of that stuff. Like, why did you choose product management? Why product management?
Yeah, I would say I've always had like an interest in starting something, like just kind of an entrepreneurial itch. Even while I was in the Navy, had a couple like side projects and things I worked on. Nothing really took off, but always kind of had that desire to build things. And when I got out of the Navy, I didn't like I thought I wanted to get into tech, but I just wasn't sure how. And so I started out doing like some data science and analysis work, and ultimately found a path to Capital One as an analyst. But I also knew that Capital One, it was a big employer. It still is in the DC area, which is where I lived. And I knew that they were doing a big tech transformation. So I thought it might be an opportunity. Let me get into a company that's doing, investing a lot in tech. But I don't have a tech background. So I need to get into that company with the skill set that I already have. So I leveraged like my analytical and analysis background to get in as an analyst. And then when I joined my team in credit card fraud, they were growing. I worked on the first party fraud team, which is when first party fraud is when people commit fraud on their own account. So if you open a credit card account and commit fraud on your own account, that's called first party fraud. And it's notoriously hard to stop because you don't know someone's going to commit fraud until they do it. And so that was the team I was on. It was a growing team with more and more problems to solve. And at one point, our team had a tech team assigned to us. We got our own tech team to build the fraud solutions that we were designing rather than having to get on another team's backlog. And when that happened, my team lead said, "Hey, Pat, like I know you've expressed interest in product. Do you want to be the product manager for this tech team in addition to your analysis work?" And I said, "Sure, I'd love to." I had no clue what I was getting into. I didn't really know anything about product other than like reading a few books and some blogs and YouTube, but I'd never done it before. And so I kind of jumped in. And over the next year and a half, 2 years, I was doing both jobs at the same time. And I was starting to get burned out because I was doing the analysis work, the strategy work, as well as working with the engineers to build, ship, release, measure, and everything that comes later. And what I realized is it was just too much work for myself. And I needed to pick a path of what I wanted to continue doing. Was it the analysis work or did I wanted to pivot into product? I ended up pivoting to product because I just like the building aspect more than the analysis that went into figuring out what we were going to build. And so after that, I spent more time doing product work, and then eventually wanted to get into a more product-oriented team. And that's why I came to CreditWise, since CreditWise is a unique team in Capital One in that we kind of have our own app, our own standalone service. The team is built like a traditional product team, and have been getting more and more invested in a traditional product role at CreditWise.
Yeah, I've seen this trend a lot. Right, a lot of people wanting to build things, tinker, and build with themselves, moving into product management and trying that because they kind of have that influence where they can get things together to move that into a product, right? Idea to product. Very very well said, Pat. So, Pat, I'm a little curious, right? So, this is not a traditional path where you maybe do a bachelor's or a master's and in the technology field and then get into developing or product management and all that stuff, right? So, what was your experience transitioning from active duty to the job market, right? Like, how does that process look like for you?
Yeah, I think so. The way that like veterans transition out is always unique because some of them want to go back where they're from. Most of them don't live where they're from anymore because they join the military, they move all over the world. Some of them want to go back home. Some of them want to leverage the experience they had in the military into the private industry. So if they have specific skill sets, like if I wanted to do construction management or structural design, I had 7 years of experience I could have leveraged, but I just wasn't really in love with it. And so I didn't want to do that. And I figured if I was going to take a pivot, that was the time. And so some veterans know exactly what they want to do. And for those, they typically, jump into the job market, they find some mentors, they start going through the interview process and they figure it out on their own. For me, I wasn't really sure other than I just don't want to do construction. So I worked with a headhunting firm that works with military officers when they're getting out to find their first job placement. And their advice to me was, you've got a technical background that generally pays better and is more valued in private industry, and you should leverage it. And so I landed at a manufacturing company doing data science work. I knew data science was is the future in a lot of ways for many companies. And so I thought that would be a good first step when I got out. I definitely learned a ton. I learned how to work with data, think critically. But what I found is like the manufacturing process they were working on was they were making roofing shingles, and roofing shingles are made the same way they were 60, 70 years ago. So very antiquated technology, not that fascinating to me, at least. Maybe I'm sure there are some, people out there who love roof shingles, but I am not one of them. And I just kept, you hear on the news like AI and machine learning and, getting everything into the cloud and like all of these, like, I felt like the technology I was working on was looking backwards, not looking forwards. And I wanted to get into like where the world is headed, where the country's headed, where so many companies were headed into the tech space. And so that's when I eventually made my pivot into Capital One. And so I think, I'll kind of wrap that up with saying veterans oftentimes don't know what they want to do. And there's like a lot of statistics out there that cover the fact that many veterans, I think it's like 60 to 80% leave their first job after the military within 1 to 2 years. And a lot of this is because they don't know what they want to do. And I think I was part of that group. I directionally had a sense of where I wanted to go, but ultimately it took me a couple years to find my way into product. And now I feel like I'm in a job family and a career that I'm interested in and passionate about and can see a future in it. And so it took me a little bit of time. I think that is the case for a lot of veterans, but it's a process, and now I'm here.
If you have watched our video for so long, I hope you guys are enjoying all the topics that we are discussing. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
So, Pat, I have actually read this book called Extreme Ownership. So, that's basically about a veteran and the leadership skills he learned, and how can we apply that in management and all of that stuff. I was very inspired by that and all. So, I'm assuming you might have gained a lot of management or leadership skills while in your service, right? What were they, and how did that transition into the work which you are doing now?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because the biggest difference in leadership in the military and not in the military is that in the military it's very hierarchical. And when people are given an order, as long as it's a lawful order, they have to follow that order. Now, in practice, day to day, people aren't barking orders at each other, but generally, like if your boss tells you to do something, you do something. And the reason that's important is because you can imagine on D-Day, right? Like they're storming the beaches of Normandy, and General Eisenhower tells the Allied forces, like, all right, let's go do D-Day. And the soldiers are like, I don't think so. You know, like, like at the end of the day, they got to follow the orders because in certain situations it's called for. And in the military, that's generally how it operates. So, but in reality, like the way you get things done, both in the military and much more so outside of the military, is influence. And like influential leadership is a super important skill for product managers because, you know, whether you're in an IC role or even if you're a VP of product, you're still in the majority of the leadership that you're doing is influential leadership. Like your team, generally, you're going to have like talented people working for you who are going to kind of drive their teams and drive their products and their you know, features that they're working on. You have to spend much more of your time influencing those around you. And so that has been by far the most important skill that I've been working on since I got out. And but what I think was helpful is having that time in the military to understand that, yeah, there is a structural component to leadership in the military, but the way you get stuff done in the military, honestly, is no different. Like you have to influence people because there are many competing priorities. And a lot of the times, like particularly when you're deployed, we work with adjacent units. And adjacent units are units that you work with, but don't report in the same structure as you. And you need to get them to do stuff for you. And just like product teams have a massive backlog and you want to get prioritized on that, adjacent units have a massive backlog and you need to get prioritized on their backlog. And so it's building those connections, building those relationships, finding alignment between your team and their team and what you're both trying to do. It's the same skills. And so while I didn't realize it at the time, that influential leadership development that I had when I was in Cameroon, Africa, you know, is the same, you know, skills that I'm leveraging today. And so now it's much more so working with the stakeholders that my team works with, which a lot of times are the business teams that put offers on the CreditWise app, like card cross-marketing, auto product cross-marketing, bank product cross-marketing, aligning their business priorities with our priorities and finding ways to get the work we want prioritized that still benefits them. I mean, it's all the same. So I think people think the military is like barking orders, but that's more so for the movies. In reality, it's a lot of influence. And so that skill is translated into product.
Yeah, especially product managers, right? Influence without authority, right? Anybody who's in IC or early in the career, you kind of have to influence people around you to get the things done and move the ball rolling, right? That's a thing. That's an essential skill for anybody in the product management
Yeah, I have a
field.
follow-up question on that, Pat. Like, I mean, if you could share to our viewers, like, probably top two or three things that really work to master that skill, because as you said, that's one of the most important skill for any product manager, right? Like, as you said, like, a lot of people even don't even report to us, but we need to still get the work done. What would
Yeah.
that be?
Yeah, I think a good example is, or a good way to think about it is influencing your stakeholders before you need to influence them. And what that means is, I think you have to get aligned on what your team is trying to do and get it aligned with what they're trying to do so that there's much less opportunity to say no to each other because you're generally aligned on the direction you're trying to head anyway. And so what we did last year on our team is I felt like we did not have, like, I was trying to figure out what our roadmap was when I first joined CreditWise. Like, what are we doing next? Where are we headed? And the issue I kept running into is like, well, I don't know where we're trying to be in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. Like, we're just building this roadmap, but like, what is our direction? And so after a couple months on the team, we decided we need to have a vision. Then from that, we'll build our strategy. And then from there, we can build our roadmap. And so we spent some time as a group, like working on our vision, like what is our we wanted to do a 5-year vision. We decided to start with a 3-year vision and then we'll expand it later. So we started with a 3-year vision And then we said, okay, to achieve that destination vision, what do we think we need to do to get there? And so from there, we built out our strategy. And then once we got to about an 80% solution in terms of what we thought was a good starting point, then we took it to all of the stakeholders in CreditWise. We took it to our growth team, which is focused on acquisition. We took it to our partnerships team. They work with they work with people that we partner for growth with. We took it to our engagement team. We took it to so many different stakeholders to get their early investment and feedback. And that enabled us to not only get a more refined vision and strategy, but it also brought them along on the journey. And so later on, I don't have to influence nearly as hard because they know our strategy, they know our vision already, and they had input into it to help refine it so that we can all go collectively, towards the same destination. And the struggle is that takes time. It took 3 months to start to finish to go through all of that. And it's always a continuous process. The problem is, as product managers, we tend to be impatient and we want stuff now. But that's one of those things that just takes time. And so I think if you set aside hey, we're going to do our vision and our strategy. We're going to take 3 months to get it in place. Then we're going to socialize it, bring people along on the journey, get them invested in what you're trying to do. I think you'll have a much easier time influencing because 80% of the work is already done when you have that aligned vision and strategy.
Yeah, I think
That's a
that's a
great
very,
point.
very, very important point, right? You actually make people part of your vision rather than you going to them saying this is what the vision is, right? That actually brings in more, what do you say, companionship and, people also owning the same vision which you have and, kind of ride along with you.
Yeah, great point, Pat. There. I mean, people don't want to be surprised. I mean, that's the last thing they want. We don't need to operate in silos. So that's a very good point.
Yeah. So Pat, maybe I'll ask you a question, right? So so were there any challenges you faced while transitioning? You talked about the story of how could you transition into tech and how did you find your feet and all of that stuff. What were there any real challenges which you had to go through in that journey?
Going from the military into private industry or moving
Yeah,
into product?
moving into private industry and product as well.
Yeah, I think moving into private industry, one of the things so my first job that I took when I got out, I said was in manufacturing doing data science, and that company hires a lot of veterans. And so the group that I worked with were a bunch of other former military officers who had also recently got out. And it was easy to build a lot of camaraderie with them because we would just tell sea stories, basically military stories, this way to get along. But when I left that company and I came to Capital One, I'm not working with anybody who was in the military. And what I found is it's hard to describe, but I just couldn't really relate in the same way. And so what I had to do was go back to my foundational skills of learning how to relate with people. And one of the skills that I learned very early on as a military officer is these simple questions go so far. And I thought it was really silly when I first joined the military, but every time I would check in with a new unit or with a new leader, they would say, are you married? Do you have kids? Where are you from? What's your favorite sports teams? Basic questions. And I always felt like it was contrived because I'm you don't really care. But then every time those good leaders would see me, they would ask me, hey, how's your brother doing? He just joined the Air Force. Or, hey, how'd the Yankees do this weekend? Because I'm a Yankees fan. Those little things, I started feeling them working. And I was this is ridiculous. I thought those were contrived questions, but this leader seemingly actually cares about my personal life. And so that's what I did when I came to Capital One. I couldn't relate to anybody by telling sea stories, because if you've been in the military and you're talking to someone who hasn't, and you're talking about that last deployment, they can't relate to that. It's such a unique experience. So you have to find things that you can relate. So for example, one of the guys on my team today is a huge soccer fan. He is an Arsenal fan, a team based in London in the English Premier League. And I watch soccer too. I'm a Barcelona fan. So when I first met engineers on my team, I started asking them things about their personal lives, and people's eyes light up when you connect with them on a personal level. And so that's been the biggest learning point for me as I got out is okay, I can't relate with the military stuff, because most people have not been in the military. Let me go back to what was it about the military? It was that common experience. So let me find other common experiences I have with people who weren't in the military, whether they're engineers, designers, analysts, attorneys, whoever we work with. And as we talked, we work with a lot of stakeholders, but it's that foundational relationship skill that I've had to go back to and continue to reinforce, because quite frankly, it really, really works. And if people like you and they like to work with you, it's going to be a much better relationship when you're trying to get work done.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I could actually relate this to something which I had in my experience, right? Like I came in as an immigrant to the US, right? And when you come as an immigrant, right, there's a lot of cultural shock, and also all of this relatability is not that easy. And you go through that struggle of trying to learn things here and also relate to people and all. So I'm sure Fanny or Srinath might have gone through the same thing. And I can absolutely relate to your experience there. Cool. So I also want to touch upon your podcast. So I see that when I go through the contents of it, it's kind of it brings in like a lot of information on how to prepare resumes. How do you get into the active job market, and prepare yourself, make yourself ready, and all of that stuff. So could you throw some light into anybody who's watching it, right, who's a veteran who want to move into tech or product management, right? How does your podcast help, and what was your idea behind building that podcast?
Yeah, no, I'd love to. When I got out, I was using all these different resources. There's like all these nonprofits that help veterans transition out, because it is a really weird experience of, okay, particularly for people who did like purely military roles. So like if you're an infantry soldier for 8 years, what are you going to do when you get out? Like you can't be an infantry soldier in the private sector, right? And so it's this challenging experience where you have to figure out, what did I learn that is translatable? And that's a difficult process to work through. And as I was going through that process myself, I felt like there's a lot of different mentorship opportunities or boot camp type classes I could take, but there wasn't like a roadmap, to use a product term. There wasn't a roadmap to like approaching the transition. And in the military, every service has different documents, but they're generally called like a standard operating procedure or a field manual or a field guide. And there wasn't any of that to get out, because the military doesn't really care how you get out. They're focused on you being, a service member while you're in. And so what I wanted to create was basically a standard operating procedure for getting out. Like, what is the 80% solution to building a resume? Just like, get me started, give me a standard template. It's going to get refined and changed over time, but give me a starting point. What are the needs to know for interviews? Like, what do I need to know? What are the stupid things military veterans do in interviews that I can make sure I avoid? Like cursing. Like, I've been in interviews where veterans are cursing in the middle of their interview. Like, they're getting too comfortable, and if you go into military units, there's, they swear like sailors, as they say. So, just like silly mistakes. And so that's what the podcast is centered around. Give me a starter resume format so I can get started. Getting started is much more important than what the format is. Get me basics on interviews. How should I approach interviews? I know what military interviews are like. Private industry is very different. So how do I approach that given my experience? And then the last part is LinkedIn, which is really, in my opinion, like the most important episodes, which is, how do you build out your LinkedIn and how do you start networking? And like, networking is truly like where opportunities, you find your best opportunities, and where you're going to have the most success in terms of finding that first role when you get out, or future role. And so that's what the podcast is all centered around, is like, it's a monologue podcast. I don't interview anybody, but a lot of research from my friends who have gotten out, things that I learned along the way, and things that I've learned from other people, is all put into these anywhere from 15 to 45-minute episodes where I talk about one specific topic and go really deep on it, like how to build a LinkedIn headline, how to fill out your about section, how do you message someone on LinkedIn, how do you use the search function, like all these basic things that I go really deep on to give you like a starting point. And again, it's my perspective based on my experience, but I just didn't see anything else out there like it. And then I wanted to bring that experience into this day and age. How are people consuming information? And I felt like podcast is a great place to do that. People can listen to it on their way to work. They don't have to spend 30 minutes reading a blog post or something like that. Just keep it simple, easy, and approachable.
Yeah, that's right. So I kind of did a quick search, as I said before, right? I couldn't find much a lot of information there. So maybe you should also put it on YouTube, Pat, so that it's more, anybody who wants to watch it on YouTube would, love to do that. But what we'll do is we'll actually add the podcast link to the description so that people can go in and start watching it. But do you have any particular episode in mind that you want to start people, want people to start with?
I think I've done 4 series or 4 seasons, if you will. Resume, interviews, LinkedIn profile, and LinkedIn networking. I would actually probably do those probably in reverse. Like I would start with LinkedIn networking because to me that's like the most powerful. So, whatever episode kind of kicks off that phase, I think that's where I would start because that's where all the conversations are going to happen. Veterans will figure out what they're actually interested in based on who they're talking to. And then they can eventually finish with like, their resume and start applying for jobs.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, yeah. We'll also maybe put the link to that episode specifically so that people can start from there. But well, that's a lot of information, right? Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. So, Pat, like the way I see your profile, right? You have done some excellent work in military. Then you came to product management, and you're also good at content creation at like multiple places. I've been looking at your Twitter profile, and I'm a big fan of. I think one of your biggest tweets there, right, where you talked about several SQL commands that a product manager needs to know. So, can you shed some light on that? Like, what did you provide, and then how do you think it's beneficial for product managers?
The content creation work.
Yeah, content creation in Twitter, especially a focus on data there. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I started Twitter because I felt like it's becoming more and more important to have a brand nowadays as a product manager or any kind of professional. And I thought Twitter, I thought about LinkedIn at first, but LinkedIn posts are long. They tend like good posts tend to be long. And I was like, I can do 280 characters on Twitter. I can do that. Like, so let me start with Twitter. I can look at LinkedIn maybe later on. And so that's why I started there. It was just an easy place to get started. And tweets are, they can be like really simple. You can just have an idea and tweet it out and see if it resonates or not. And so that's why I started there. The next goal was like, what is my niche? And I thought, oh, product management. I'm a product manager. That's, let me see if there's a product management community. And certainly found one with Sid and so many others who are involved in that community. But what I've learned over time is like, you really got to carve out a niche. And I think if you start early with a super, super unique niche, it might be hard to find people. And so what I figured is let me start with product management. Let me just try a ton of different topics, different things that I have some skills in, see what resonates. And what I've been finding over the past 9 months is that SQL analytics piece is really resonating. And I haven't seen anyone else really talking about that, leveraging data as product managers. I see some people saying, well, why can't I just use Amplitude or why can't I just use like the existing off the shelf tools? But what I always go back to is you might not have those tools. Like onboarding Amplitude or any other B2B SaaS product to do analytics for you, you're not going to necessarily have that at a startup. And if you're working at a big company, they may not have that. Capital One, 50,000 person company, does not have any basic analytic platforms because the expectation is you'll just learn SQL and you'll query our SQL databases on your own. And what Capital One found out over the past like 15, 20 years as the analyst community has matured is they built an internal tool called Symphony, I think it was called. And it was a UI that would allow you to easily query. But the problem they kept coming back to is analysts wanted to do analysis that product wouldn't provide. And so analysts just started learning SQL on their own so they could do the analysis they wanted rather than waiting for Symphony to update so that they could do the analysis they wanted. So then they said, let's just scrap Symphony, tell every analyst to learn SQL and Python if they want, and they'll just do it on their own. And so that's why I'm so passionate about product managers learning SQL. You might not need it today because your company might have Amplitude or one of these other tools, but your next job might not. And if you know the basics of SQL, which is really easy, like it's not nearly as confusing as people think at first glance. If you just learn the basics, like those basic commands I talked about in that thread, like that's enough to get you started. And then from there, you just go to ChatGPT to get some help, or you go to stackoverflow.com. Those are great resources, and they'll help you figure your way from there. And so that's what I'm starting to find is resonating. It's something that I haven't seen too many other people talk about, and something where I'm seeing people are interested in learning more.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, even I went through your the sheet that you shared. Right, it was awesome. It talks about all the basic commands that a PM needs to know, um, especially to query your own data and find the things that you might not see easily. Actually, a couple of questions on this, right? So, as product managers, data is one of our biggest weapons. We need to probably be looking at data and identifying trends and stuff as often as possible. So, how do you use data in like making some of these decisions at work?
Yeah, I think the most challenging part of data is finding the right data. Like oftentimes, by the time you find the tables you need and the attributes or columns that you need, at that point, you just got to write the query. But the hard part is finding the tables. And honestly, that can be really painful. So I think that's where, I found I'm spending most of my time is finding the right tables. And so I think when it comes to doing data analysis, is understanding what you have available to you. So whatever company you're in, get with the people who are in the data every day. It could be data engineers, it could be data scientists, it could be data analysts. Whoever's like spends their time mostly in the data, they're going to be the most familiar with the tables. And believe it or not every company has great documentation on their data. Capital One is investing a tremendous amount in being better about how we manage data. But even a multi-billion-dollar company doesn't have like the ideal state of documenting their data infrastructure and what's available both in production for production environments, but also what's available in the analytical environment. So my biggest thing is like figure out what data you have available and understand the tables that you need and what the attributes mean within those tables. I think that is like the biggest hurdle initially. And then once you do that, my recommendation when it comes to learning SQL or analysis is partner with someone who's already doing it. If you go to datacamp.com or learnsql.com or any of these things, they're going to teach you like a broad application of how to use these different languages. And when you get into some of the more expansive ones like Python can do anything. You can build apps with Python. You can do data science with Python. You can query with Python. It does a million different things. What you need to know is how SQL or Python or any other language applies to your day-to-day. And so what I always recommend is on-the-job training. Find the problem that you need to solve and then work backwards from there. Okay, I need to figure out the stickiness of our app. And stickiness is like, customers coming back to your app. So define what that means. Like, what is the metric? We're trying to, figure out stickiness. You could define stickiness potentially as daily active users divided by monthly active users. Okay, so I need to figure out my DAUs and my MAUs. Okay, so how would I define those? Okay, figure out whatever equation you want. That's going to help you figure out the attributes. Okay, I need to know these specific data points. Then you go to the analyst and you say, hey, I need to solve this problem. Here's what I think I need. Can you help me? They're going to show you how to write that in SQL, that specific query, and then how to solve your particular problem. And that's going to be way more relevant than going to data camp, spending 3 months on data camp learning basic SQL, and then you go to your job and only 10% of it is applicable. Work backwards from the problems you have today. And people, one thing I found is people love to teach. When I join my teams, I always get with my engineers and I say, show me what you're working on. And they love to show what they're working on, particularly if they like what they do, which hopefully they do. And so the same is true with analysts. Like, get with them and say, hey, can you show me, I need to solve this problem. Can you show me how I should go about it? And people will be happy to spend some time showing you. They like to show off what they're good at. And analysts are very good at SQL and doing analysis. And so my recommendation is on the job training. It's a very common tactic in the military. And I think it's a great application for product managers is learning things you don't know. Just learn on the job because that's going to be the most relevant and the most efficient use of your time. And as you guys know, and I'm sure many of the listeners know, product managers don't have a lot of free time. So you want to be as efficient as possible as you can when you're trying to learn something new.
No, that's a great point. I think it has come handy for me as well, especially when I was in Amazon. I mean, to be honest, I was initially I didn't know how to write SQL, but when I closely work with our BI and data engineering team, and we are very few resources, just like two BIs for our Amazon Business Payments team, and it was definitely hard to get work done from them because obviously they don't have unlimited bandwidth. So what really helped me was some of the things that you mentioned, figuring out what that data structure, metrics, definitions look like, and obviously they were ready to teach, so we can be self-service from our side as well, and so we don't need to bug them always.
Yeah, and oftentimes the queries are so simple. Like you just need to run like one or two queries. If you ask an analyst, it might take them a week because they're doing other things. If you did it, take you, 5 minutes. So it can really make you so much more efficient too. I've seen this meme. I've seen this meme on LinkedIn or Twitter, and it's I think a data scientist tweeted it out, and he said it's like a meme, and it says when people ask me to pull some data, and it says select star, which means like select from a table anything, and then it says from table perfect table that doesn't exist. Like people who aren't in the data think that there's just a table that has what you need, but in reality, most analysis is like query after query after query, like subqueries, like digging into it. It's not, so to your point, Sid, like you're just going to have to keep going back and back and back. And if you can just get, initially familiar with SQL, you'll save yourself time and everybody else time. One thing I tweeted, I don't know, a couple months ago maybe, was like, you don't have to be like, if anyone's listening and they've been on Twitter, Shreyas Doshi is like one of the biggest product influencers on Twitter, right? He's got like hundreds of thousands of followers. He was one of the first PMs at Stripe. You don't have to be Shreyas to like share what you're learning on Twitter. And sometimes we learn best from people who are one or two steps ahead of us. Like Shreyas has been VP of product. He's worked at many companies. Like he's got tons of advice, but his advice it can range like all these different outcomes. And it might be for someone who's more senior than you. It might be someone more junior. It's going to have all these different impacts. But sometimes like if you're an APM, you want to learn from someone who was recently an APM, if you're an APM and you're trying to learn from a VP of product, like it's been a long time since they were a junior product manager, but the person who was most recently there and promoted out of it, like they're going to remember what it was like and be able to relate to you more. So anybody that thinks like, I don't know enough, like, believe me, you know more than lots of people behind you. And so just share what you know and be confident in the, it might not feel like a lot, but the more you write, the more you'll realize you have to share. You will say stupid things. I definitely have said stupid things that people, like one time I unintentionally offended designers because of a way I phrased a tweet, and designers came at me. And so I think, you just have to be receptive, and I think it's helpful too, because it helped me understand like a designer's perspective and how what I said was interpreted differently than what I intended. And so, you're going to learn like trial by fire, but I think that's a fast way to learn.
Yeah, I have a question more around. I mean, one of the things which was striking to me when I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and Twitter and all that stuff, I saw that you excel in building and leading high performing teams, and which is amazing. What strategies do you use to keep your team motivated and engaged during this whole product development process? And what are some of the tips that you could give for any ICPM who is also looking for leadership role in near-term future?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would sum it up with like three words: empowerment, recognition, and resilience. To me, those are like the foundational skills to like building high performing teams. Empowerment is probably the most important. And if you read Marty Kagan's book, Inspired, his second book is Empowered, and he talks about empowered product teams. And there's a lot of different ways you can talk about that term, but the way that I interpret it, and the way that I leverage that, is empowering people on my team to be more independent. Because when you first set on a team, your engineers may come to you with every single question about what they're working on. Hey, is this what you want? Is this looking correct? Your designer might come and say, hey, is this what you had in mind? But what we try to do on my teams is give people as much context up front and empower them to make decisions rather than the product manager having to make all the decisions. And one of the ways that you do that with engineers is you don't tell them how to build something, you just tell them what you want. So defining that what up front and that why is really important. And like one of my engineering managers told me when I was early in product, he said, don't tell the chefs how to cook, you know, and it's kind of the same with engineers. Don't tell them how to build. They're engineers. Just tell them what you want and why you want it a particular way, and they'll figure out what the right end state looks like. And obviously, they're not going to come back with a finished product. There's an iterative aspect to it. But I think empowering them to make decisions is like foundationally important. And then in terms of keeping them motivated, recognition is hugely important. In the military, if you look at any uniform, you'll see all these ribbons and medals like on their chest. And what I found in the military is it's not the ribbons and medals that are as important as the recognition that comes with them. People like to be recognized. And so finding ways to recognize people on your team is hugely important. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can do, like we have a Slack channel on my team called CreditWise Appreciation. And people just Slack in, they tag people, hey, shout out to Johnny for doing this thing for our team or whatever. And people react with all the emojis and stuff. Another option is we do Recognition Wednesday. So after stand up every Wednesday, we do live shout outs where people shout each other out for things that happened over the past week. And one thing I found out like a year after joining Capital One was Spot Awards. We have a whole system for Spot Awards. And at my level, I can give $25 Spot Awards. Like it's based on your team's budget, but I don't need to get those approved. I can just submit them. So like once a quarter, I make an effort of like looking at all the things we accomplished and just going into our system and giving out $25 Spot Awards for like all these different things. And that goes a long way. And so recognition, I think, is like hugely important. That keeps people motivated, and they feel like they're part of something. And then the last part is resilience. I'm sure you guys know, like product does not always go well. Like you might have an A/B test that does not go the way you were hoping. You might present to a VP and it does not go well. They rip apart your presentation or ask you all these questions you weren't expecting. But your next meeting is back with your engineers and they're really excited about whatever you're building. And you cannot like come in there acting like a loser, like, you know, and feeling defeated. Like you've got to be like, all right, let's get back into it. You've got to keep going. You got to find a way to keep doing that. And so I think those three are kind of what I would say is most important when you're building teams, is empowering them to be independent and to make decisions and to be part of the solutioning process, not just responding to it, recognizing them continuously when they do good work. And then lastly, building that resilience over time and realizing that, you know, you're the leader, you're leading that team in a lot of different ways. And you got to show up each and every day, keeping everybody motivated to keep going after whatever it is your team is working on.
Yeah, those are great tips. I mean, especially I think for people who are new into product management, or and maybe some of the individual contributors as well. Probably they don't probably do that. But as you go up the ladder, that's pretty important when you have to bring teams together. On a similar, I mean, or a follow up question on that. For all this, building relationships is very important. I mean, especially when you work with so many different teams, and I'm sure every product manager closely works with engineering on a day-to-day basis. But we often see that like lack of trust sometimes, some of the people facing challenges, especially with the trust issues, because I've seen in the past where some of the teams were not getting along with each other. So I was just curious if you could share something that worked out really well to build and master that trust skill for any PM.
Yeah, like a situation where people were working together but didn't trust each other, something like that, or is that kind of what you have in
Yeah.
mind?
I think it's more of a situation where people felt their voice was not heard and there was less trust between the teams and nothing was getting done. And I'm sure
Okay.
like a lot, few people, I mean, everyone has their own perspectives. So when a PM was working with so many different teams, and in this case, I'm just taking an example of engineering, I mean, they may face that. So I was just curious, how can we bring those teams together, build the trust?
Yeah, I think what's really important in that kind of situation and that kind of process is, you know, whenever you're on a product team, you're working with really talented people. You know, your engineers are really talented, designers are really talented. Like working in tech just requires a lot of skills. And everybody, like most people you work with, are going to have an opinion of how to do something. And at the end of the day, like if the direction is to go do this way, this thing, like people will genuinely do it, but you're not going to have a healthy team if that's your approach, just directing people what to do. What I found, what really helps with like building trust is giving people a voice just to voice their opinion. Like that initial starting point of, hey, this is what we want to do. How would you guys do it? Is like critical, because myself and anybody else will be much more like we'll feel much more like empowered to do our jobs if at least we had a voice in the process. Like everybody knows that if there's 10 opinions, we can't do something 10 different ways. We can only do it one way. And so I think people generally respect the fact that, you know, we might not always do what they want, but if they at least have an opportunity to voice that opinion, I think that's generally a big part of it. It's like getting into the psychology of like working with people. And so a lot of times, like one of the ways that I recommend this is sometimes my engineers will come and ask me a question, or a designer. And I always try to, my first response is like, well, what do you think? You know, like, give me, like, what would you do here? Because I just want them to at least feel like they had a say. And I would say like 80% of the time I do what they recommend, you know? So it just makes it a more efficient. They feel like, hey, that's what I wanted to do anyway. Like I'm part of the decision-making process. And so I think whenever you're in those situations where teams disagree or people disagree about an approach, just everybody having like spend the time to get everybody's input. You know, if you go a different direction, people are generally okay with that. Just spend the time to get the input, because everybody knows we have to drill down to one option. But I think if you do that, that can eliminate a lot of trust issues, because people will feel like they're being heard. And psychologically, like that's just really important when you're working with stakeholders or people, your team or different teams.
Yeah. So if people don't agree with your solution, make them part of the solution.
Yeah, right. Right, exactly.
Yeah, being that open-mindedness is very important, especially giving that opportunity for other, creating that like equity and inclusive environment is very important when you work with so many different people. That really makes them part of it.
Yeah, and also in product management, right? I feel that there's like a lot of uncertainty, and there's no one path to go to, you know, where you want to get to, right? So it's like, you know, if anybody who's uncomfortable with uncertainty, this is maybe not your cup of tea, but I think it's basically learning in a job and trying to get, you know, to the point where you want to. Yeah, I'd say we did cover a lot of information, right, Pat? So we talked about a lot of data stuff, like how could product managers be empowered with data, use of data. Talked about how veterans could get into product management, and your podcast and all of that stuff. Talked about leadership skills used and all of that stuff. So, you know, I think it was a very, very interesting conversation on all of these topics. So maybe, you know, to wrap up, right, I would ask you one question, right? If you want to give anybody one piece of final advice, right? Any young professional who's wanting to break into product management, what would that be?
My advice is pretty simple, and you can hear a lot of it on my podcast. It's geared toward veterans, but the tactics are the same. Get on LinkedIn. If you have to pay for a premium account, pay for a premium account for like a couple months. Veterans actually get one for a year of premium. And there's like this weird hack where like I just reapply every year and I get it again. So I'm like on my 4th year of free premium. but pay a couple months for premium. Find people at your target companies who are product managers and direct message them. Keep that direct message within one phone screen, like above the fold, which is like a marketing term. Like keep it so they don't have to scroll to read the message. So it should be short and to the point, and find a way to relate to them. For veterans, my strategy is, hey, if you send a message to someone who is a veteran and you let them know you're a veteran, they're much more likely to respond. So even if you're not a military veteran, find a way that you relate to that person. Maybe you're from the same country, went to the same college, you know, some type of relatability. And you can do that oftentimes in your search function. So you can search for, you know, let's say you are, you know, you're targeting Google. You can say current employer, Google, past employer. If you're a veteran, is like U.S. Army. If you went to the same college, just say, you know, education is, you know, University of Virginia, whatever college. And then all the people at Google who went to that college or who are veterans are going to show up. Direct message them with a super short message and say, hey, you'd love to like, you know, buy them a virtual coffee or chat for 15 minutes to get their opinion. You're trying to break into product. you'll get a decent hit rate. When I did it, I got like 30-40% of people replied. And then of those people, just get them on the phone as quickly as possible. Set up a Zoom call for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever. Get them on the phone and just talk to them. You're going to benefit in two ways. The first is you're building your network. So you're forming relationships with people who are, might want to help you later on. But secondly, you're talking to people who are on the inside, and they're going to help. Like, if they like you and it goes well, they might help you come in. They might give you a referral. They might point you to a hiring manager. Like, that's, we were talking about it offline with Srinath. Like, that's how you get jobs, right? You find it through your network. And LinkedIn enables you to not necessarily be friends with people at those companies. You can find people that you can relate to, and people will help you. And so if you're trying to break into product, I wouldn't get too, obsessed with the certificates and stuff. I would really spend your time on building, like finding ways to build small projects on the side. And there's a lot of content out there on how to do that and how to go about that. So you can demonstrate that you understand like the process of building products. But at the end of the day, tactically, like, how are you going to get it? Build those connections. And I think LinkedIn is like such an underrated and powerful tool to do that if you go about it the right way. And so it's find PMs in the companies that you're interested in, message them, get on the phone and learn from them. People are nice. Product managers are nice. We're all nice. Like, people will help you out. So reach out. You can also do it on Twitter. Reach out to me or Sid or Srinath or Phani. Like, people will help you out. So just make the effort, do the hard work, and people will help you get there. And so that'd be my advice, is just build those relationships.
Yeah, I love that advice, Pat. So, first is reach out to people. Second is build side projects, right? That's like the
Yes.
crux of it. Yeah, perfect. And I also love that nugget you gave, right? Like, where you keep it short and readable in the phone screen size, so that people don't need to scroll through the complete message, and you kind of have so much matter in that. Perfect. So. Before we wrap this up, right? If you were to recommend a podcast or a book, what would that be?
For product managers? Yeah, so everybody recommends Inspired. So I'm not going to recommend that. I'm going to recommend a different one. It's this book. It's called Build What Matters. For those listening, it's called Build What Matters. It's written by Ben Foster, who was the chief product officer at Whoop, which is like those wearable Whoop products you may have seen, and Rajesh Nurlikar. Rajesh is my product coach at Capital One. He runs a company called Prodify, and they're product coaches and consultants. But this book is awesome. It's all about vision-led product management, like defining what you're trying to get to and working back from there, and essentially building what matters. And so you're not going to see it as recommended. But I read this one when I first joined CreditWise, and I met Rajesh. And I just love this book because it just focuses on what matters. Like, that's what we want to do as product managers, build what matters. And so that would be one that people may not have heard of before, but I definitely recommend.
Sure. Yeah, I'll have it in my backlog of books. Yeah. So thanks a lot, Pat. Thanks for joining us. So it was, great talking to you. A lot of experiences, and maybe we'll do another session later sometime, digging deep more into your experience into the veteran space and all of that stuff. But, a great conversation. Thanks a lot for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Pat. Nice meeting you.